It's all about getting the timing right when it comes to patents for me. We need to understand why you think that patent is so important and what your strategy is around protecting it.
It's got to be cool, it's got to be interesting, it's got to attract somebody. And once you get over that kind of first 40 seconds to maybe 3-4 minutes of someone's interest, if they like it, they'll come back.
But I think every grant assessor appreciates honesty, and no startup team and nobody that applies for a grant has got everything that they need. They're not big corporates, they're not blue chips that are applying for them. So to pretend that you are in that stage that all you need is money, that comes across as very false.
Welcome to the IP-driven Startup Podcast from Marks & Clerk. Today we're talking early stage investment with Dr. Andy Round, who spent over 15 years in venture capital, investing and exiting with life sciences startups, and is currently a senior investment director at Deepbridge Capital. Alongside Andy Round, we're delighted to have Andy Roberts, former head of innovation at Bruntwood SciTech, who's guided countless life science startups through accelerator programs across the UK. Let's explore what investors really look for in high growth startup companies and their IP strategies. Working with the early stage companies that you do, what are you looking for in terms of that early stage IP strategy from founders?
And it's not just IP, but IP is one of the most important things. It's open-mindedness, I think, and it's the open-mindedness to go out and speak to experts and take their expertise in good faith, rather than coming in with a hardened IP strategy that they've picked up from a book or from bad advice, or sometimes even good advice or good-hearted advice. But it's actually having that flexibility to understand that there's different ways to do things, there's different types of IP, really importantly, and that investors and customers will value that IP in different ways. And I think there's a great problem really in particularly in sort of academic spin-outs, that people think the only IP to worry about is patents. We need to understand why you think that patent is so important and what your strategy is around protecting it, because what was it, 12 years to exit? That's that on a standard patent that gives you 8 years in the market. It's all about getting the timing right when it comes to patents for me. So that's why the other bits of IP become so important and actually can overtake patents in terms of novelty and trade secrets and things like that. And that can make things really exciting to work with, because apart from anything as well, the later they do that, the more chance they've got of being able to pivot on it or use that in a different way. You've already heard Andy talking about using the technology in different industries. Those things are really important, and they can be the way out for a lot of companies. So flexibility and open-mindedness and speaking to a number of different professionals is really important.
How about yourself, Andy, around general IP strategy that you look at perhaps for those early stage companies when you're in the seed funding rounds?
It's never a one size fits all. Yeah. And I think, if you're looking at small molecule or therapeutic or large molecules, but if you're in that kind of therapeutic space and you've got a new molecule and you can get very much a patent around the chemistry of that new molecule, great. Again, you talked about you've only got 20 years to exploit it, so you're already on a bit of a hide into nothing in terms of being able to get there fast enough. But at least you've got it covered. And again, if you're a small venture-backed business, you're never really going to get it all the way to market and into human anyway. So you want something that's defensible, that can stand up to scrutiny of maybe where you want to partner, which will be one of the large pharmas or biotechs. And if you can get it to the end of a phase 1 or a phase 2, great. You're then off to licensing, or you're off to a direct sale. So I think they're very different to businesses where maybe you've got things like, a device, a consumable element to that device. What are you actually protecting? And you get sort of different layers. So I've got a few where, they've got some fundamental patents, and you look at it and think, well, okay, in an ideal world, they'd be a little bit stronger, but that wouldn't stop me from doing it. Primarily because there are other extensions to that they can look at. They're in a bit of a razor blade model anyway, and there's maybe no IP on the fundamental tech, but there is on the consumable element. And Andy touched on know-how as well. I mean, I think particularly in the processing elements, a lot of process IP, be it in creation of a new material, great, you might get a patent on the chemistry, but good looking following a patent to the nth degree unless you're an expert to get some of that material. Sometimes we call it foo-foo dust. There's that extra bit of foo-foo dust that just never gets disclosed, which just makes it really, really difficult. Or I've seen, particularly in the pharma industry, when you've got a 25, 26 synthesis step to make a particular API, best of luck in trying to do that if you haven't got the experience of doing it for 20 years. So there's loads of ways in which you can build it. I mean, for me, again, it's without labouring it. There's never a one size fits all. I think as long as there's an agreed strategy, and that may change as the company develops, and also depending on what avenues you want to get down from different application areas that you maybe want to have a go at covering. I've got one at the moment where, they've got a bit of tech that's it's not old, but it'll be more than 10 years old, so the fundamental chemistry. And there are one or two large multinational blue chips who it looks like they probably are infringing. But there's no way in hell, as a venture-backed business with the sort of budget that we've got, could we really get any further than just writing them a little note just to point it out. And it's a little bit of a, we'll reserve our rights. And that's about it. And actually what's been interesting on that case is at least then it gets you on their radar. So it's like, oh, we remember you guys. And oh yeah, you were developing this. It's like, yeah, and clearly some of what you're doing here is a little bit close to what we're doing. And that particular one is not particular chemistry, it's actually the process of doing it as well. So it's quite clear that there are a few people who are now in a very similar space. So we may force a deal out of it. And if we don't, we've at least forced a relationship out of it and a conversation. If you fancy that one, that'd be great. Might take you 10 years to prosecute them, but it'd be fab.
Andy Roberts, let's move on to grant funding and what the grant funding scene looks like at the moment. Have you got any thoughts on, maybe focusing on the life science and med tech scene particularly? Is it a healthy environment right now for grant funding?
No, I think is the fundamental answer to that. I think the uncertainty from the current government and the lack of funding over the past year has really damaged a lot of early stage companies and has sort of taken that momentum out of the industry. I think there's this flickers of life, £25 million for the current biomedical catalyst scheme. It's just not really enough. And I think there's such a latent demand there from the past year that, and I am an assessor, I think the assessors are going to be swamped this time round. And, the other side to that as well is I don't know how much the assessment process is going to change over the next couple of years, but the advent of ChatGPT and things like that is going to make it difficult for assessors, because a lot of these things are going to be very, very well written and very, very slick, adhering to all of the stuff that's out in the public domain that these AI systems can scrape. So it is going to make it a lot more difficult. And I think the fundamental worry really is that latent demand is going to mean that people get funded, as is often the case, for writing a good for writing a good grant application, that rather than fundamental tech and good commercialization skills behind it.
Having written grant applications and assessed, so being on both sides of the fence, I guess, what are your tips for our listeners and viewers in terms of putting those applications together? How can they maximize their chances of success?
Number one, read the question. The number I get, and they've obviously not read the question. They've cut and pasted it from a previous grant application.
They put their name on it.
Yeah, they put the name on it, right? But it's the same thing as university exams, and just read the question two or three times. Am I really answering this? Read the guidance for it. I think secondly is just be honest as well, because grant assessors are used to seeing all singing, all dancing applications that have absolutely no risk in them whatsoever. They are written to the point that, oh God, if we give these guys 250 or 2 million quid, then they're going to go away and execute, and it's going to be £1 billion company. That's just not the reality of the world. So being completely honest about things like, gaps in your IP strategy, gaps in your team, and how you're going to address them is just as important for me. And every grant assessor is different, but I think every grant assessor appreciates honesty. And they pick up on different things. And, I've spoken to lots of other assessors, and we all have slightly different views on things, even though the guidance is there for what you score people on. The interpretation of that can be slightly subjective. It's, we do our best to be objective, but that honesty, when it comes across, you think, actually, this is a human team behind this. This isn't a ChatGPT thing. And that's the bit really that makes me think, yeah, this team are going to do this and they're going to succeed, because they're open about where the gaps are. And no startup team and nobody that applies for a grant has got everything that they need. They're not big corporates, they're not blue chips that are applying for them. So to pretend that you are in that stage that all you need is money, that comes across as very false.
Demonstrating that you understand your strengths and weaknesses from the get-go.
And it's a maturity. It's a maturity of entrepreneurship that, is actually quite rare. But when you get one like that, and I'm sure a lot of my fellow grant assessors would agree with me, when you get one like that, it's just a joy to read, and it's you get involved in it, and you think, yeah, and then your feedback as well, comes back to that, and benefits the company when they receive it.
In those applications, quite often there's a section, isn't there, around IP? How much detail as an assessor are you looking for in that section?
Well, they're limited to the number of words they can put in, so they're not going to put down, they're not going to be able to exemplify patents and things like that. But actually, just understanding what the strategy is really important. But also putting down things like, the other types of IP that they're considering, where they're at with freedom to operate. I think a lot of people think that a granted patent is a freedom to operate, and understanding that, and also who's done this work. At the end of the day, be honest about that. If you've employed an attorney, or if it's some IP expert within a university, name them. Tell us who it is. Don't just say an FCO search has been carried out, because that could be an FCO search done by, a great law firm like Marks and Clerk, or it could be, somebody doing a bit of Googling. There's a big range in there, and what you define as it. So, just being honest about that, and actually naming the people, but also going to good people and saying what your strategy is, and that you've engaged, and that you're prepared to listen. That's the really important thing, because things will change. That's the whole nature of a funded grant project. Things will change as it goes on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. One of the key challenges we have with many of our clients is the timescales it takes to negotiate the license from the university through to having that signed and sealed, and how that can disrupt investment. Do you need it to be signed and sealed before you press go on an investment? Are you happy with heads of terms being in place?
Depends which universities it is and what my relationship with them is as well. So there's a handful that, I trust the execs well enough that I'll quite happily transact and finish it, because I know they're not going to change the terms at some point in time in the future. If they do, they'll never get any more money. But joking apart, there are those where, yes, so sometimes it does take a bit of sort of toing and froing. There are a few now. I mean, Leeds has always been pretty good. Manchester historically was really, really good. Sheffield's very, very sensible. Liverpool's very, very sensible. So, we've done quite a bit out of Bristol and Bath, one or two out of Southampton. I've got quite a few out of Imperial and UCL. So again, if they've got a structure that kind of works, it can be really, really easy. But you do get the odd one where it's almost like, well, and sometimes it can be a new exec comes in, or there's a change of university strategy, and it's like, remember that old stuff we used to do? Oh, we'll just throw it out the window. We'll just start something new. So, well, that kind of worked for everybody. And I think from our side, what helps a lot of the time is being very clear with the uni, but also very clear with the company. These are the terms at which we would accept. But again, there isn't a hard and fast rule, and you'll get different VCs would want different levels of commitment than others. But I think the underlying aspect for a lot of this is it's a relationship thing. You've got a good relationship with them, and you're big deal.
Do you think it's got better over the past 10 or 15 years?
It fluctuates. It does. Fluctuate.
I've seen, and I've been involved in some horror stories.
You have, yeah.
One was a great one from a university, and they'd licensed a patent, basically exclusive use of a patent, to a company for a fee. And that spin out company then went away and did a few years' work based on that, and then through an IP audit found out that the patent had actually lapsed before the contract was signed. Now, I'm sure nobody did that on purpose, but that actually put everybody in a really awkward position. And it's the sort of thing that, if it had been dealt with properly in the first place, would never have happened. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that get made, and a lot of people that are acting in good faith. And that everything stopped for quite a while over that, because it turned out the patent was completely useless, and of course the disclosure had already been made. So it's
the value of the IP audit, yeah.
Yeah, I think also I think people, at the time were getting what they asked for, and they were asking the wrong questions, let's just say, when they went to attorneys. So I think going to attorneys with open questions and letting folks like yourself actually lead on, what needs looking at, it would be the best advice I can give anybody, to be honest, because I've seen, and that's not the only one that I've seen.
Guys, let's turn towards pitch decks and company prospectus. What are you looking for when you're helping some of your clients that you engage with in terms of putting pitch decks together? Less is more? Detail is everything? What's your view on it?
Less is more, generally speaking. Getting that elevator pitch, getting in the room, telling them what they need to know in the first few minutes, and getting that attention. And this is all cliched stuff. This is the stuff there's thousands and thousands of people on YouTube and LinkedIn telling people how to do pitch decks. But no, I don't do that. I don't do YouTube. How dare you? I might do after this. I quite enjoy the live.
There you go.
But just keeping it simple to start with, and then people can always ask questions. But I think a lot of technical founders lose their audience really, really quickly by thinking that everybody's going to be excited as excited as they are about the technology, and they're generally not. And usually the sort of screensaver expression on my face for early stage companies should tell people what they need to know about where they're at with their technology, and they're speaking to somebody that's been a scientist for the last 30 years ish, and knows his way around a periodic table and around a lab. But I want to know how it's going to sell. I want to know how it's going to make some money for people.
Andy Round, pitch decks, you must be sick to death of pitch decks in your field.
Yes, and then definitely. And then when you see a good one, it's like, oh, and then immediately, we're all human. That one goes to the top of the pile. But again, I think there's a strategy to this which is pretty well trodden. There's a pitch deck. There's an info deck once you get beyond the first meeting. There's a 1-2 pager to garner interest. And I think it does depend. It does depend if you're leveraging your own network to people that you already know. You can sometimes get away with it being a bit more scruffy and equally giving more information. If you're cold calling, which doesn't really work that well with VC, I think if you cold call a VC or cold email a VC, I've forgotten what the last sort of data was, but it's like 0.5% to 1%. You might get a reply.
Yeah.
A lot of people will just ignore cold, and it's that thing, isn't it? Why do VCs have info at on their websites when I think some people are better than others? I'm dreadful. I think I'm probably one of the worst people for info at. You read it and go, I must get back to that person, and then 9 months later they're still chasing me. So it is a bit of there's a bit of art and there's a bit of science in there. But I think you've got to pitch it at the right kind of level. You've got to, before you even write your deck, I think there's a bit of diligence you've got to do on who you're approaching. So most VCs have very clear criteria on what you should apply for and what you shouldn't. Yeah. So you can get over that quite quick. And if you want to get a foot in the door, I mean, I've seen things where they are ugly. People haven't spent any time on it. They can't spell, although neither can I. But again, we're all human, aren't we? So if it's kind of cool, looks interesting, and it's kind of attractive, it tends to go to the top of the pile, and then you can kind of work your way back through it. And if your intention is just to get a first meeting, and admittedly, I think sometimes the cold calling doesn't really work case of a first meeting. Find an event that's run by Marks and Clerks or another patent agent or a law firm or a corporate finance or a VC. Those are networking pieces that you want to do. Meet people that way, but then you've then got the opportunity to go, look, will you have a look through my 10 slides? And I always sort of run the parallel that that early get a meeting thing's a little bit like CVs. So it's got to be cool, it's got to be interesting, it's got to attract somebody. And once you get over that kind of first 40 seconds to maybe 3-4 minutes of someone's interest, if they like it, they'll come back. What I find where people fail is you may come back and say, right, can I have more information? And 3 weeks later, they still haven't sent you it. I've moved on to the next 20 things that I've got to do, and you've kind of lost me. So it is about timing, and it's about having the right content at the right time in that relationship. My advice is, find an advisor who can, if you've never done it, find someone who can give you a little bit of advice. That critical friend is quite useful. Someone who you trust enough where you can send it and they just go, that's just rubbish. Yeah. Don't send it anywhere. Start again.
So what are your key red flags or showstoppers in terms of investment, in terms of accepting a company onto a funded accelerator? What are your big turn-offs?
You can go first, because my list might be longer.
Yeah, I've got a pretty long list, to be honest. But I think the worst thing I ever see is somebody with a very closed mind, and you can usually tell that within a very short space of time. They come in and they are the best thing in the world, and they've got everything nailed down. They're telling you who's going to buy it, but then you scratch the surface and they've not actually spoken to any of these people, and there's no evidence for their claims. And I think they're the people that on the programs, and if we're running doesn't matter if we're running a 10-week program or a 12-month program, by about week 3 they're still saying the same things in the meetings. And they're the ones that I know are not going to make it. They're in the sort of 30% or so that I know are definitely not going to make it. There's another 30 to 40% that are probably not going to make it, but are acting in good faith.
Having that growth mindset, to sort of learn as you go along.
Yeah, learning, because if you're coming into a startup and you know everything, it's not a startup at the end of the day. It's an execution piece. It's not an exploration piece. But that's my main one.
And you can tell, I mean, we talked about it before, you can tell relatively early on kind of where that relationship is going to go. And even with, second and third timers, if they're willing to take a bit of advice, you can get to that point pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Depending on the sort of fund that you are, I mean, it's not really a red flag. It's just almost, if it doesn't fit a criteria, it's quite easy just to knock those ones out quite quickly. When you get to kind of the diligence phase, and we talked about, strength of license, yes or no, strength of IP, yes or no. There's always a bit of work to do around, do I genuinely believe in the kind of route to market piece that tends to sit alongside what the business model kind of looks like. And if you can't, if you don't believe, you're never going to get to sort of margin or anything else. But there's also a bit of, I mean, you mentioned it, if they're not willing to have a dialogue on things like, what the fundamental strategy is, so which country first and why, what's your regulatory framework look like, and if they are, and again, I've been there and I've done the grumpiness with investors from the other side of the fence. What do you know? I clearly know more than you because I've been doing this for 10 years. So I've been on the other side of the fence and been that grumpy git who just says, I know more than you. I think you're not willing to kind of use other people's experience, that kind of shared experience, to kind of put a plan together, then you're not really, again, it's that relationship thing. The relationship is not going to go where you kind of want it to go. It would if they were right, and it would if all of these things were linear, but they're not. They're horribly dynamic. And again, you need to have a good relationship with people, because it isn't going to be it's not going to be smooth sailing every day. And you need to invest in people where, they're going to take a couple of knocks every now and again, and they'll not thrive on it, but at least be willing to kind of go through it with you rather than fight you at every stage.
Yeah.
People who fight you at every stage, again, life's a bit short.
Those repeat founders, and the serial entrepreneurs, as they often get called, though they're great fun to work with, because very often the reason they're serial entrepreneurs is because they do listen.
Yeah.
And they know that in the vast field of human knowledge, they only know a tiny little bit, despite having all this experience, having raised money. Some of them raised 40, 50 million quid for a previous company. And they're there trying to get 250,000 quid for a startup. And actually they're listening more than the people in the room who've never done it before and are sat there thinking, oh, well, I've read this in a book, or I've seen a few YouTube videos, or I've been on a different accelerator. I know it all. And that's why these experienced folks have just been such good fun to work with over the past few years, because it's taken that sort of length of time over the past 15 years for the first companies to fail or to exit. So it's only in probably the last 3 or 4 years I've really seen these guys, and they've just been such good fun to work with. And on a positive note, that open-mindedness and the experience is brilliant, because we learn from each other, and everybody in the room learns, and that's why they're so good to be around.
Guys, I want to take this opportunity to thank you both for spending the time with us, sharing your thoughts and exploring the topics today. Thanks for listening to the IP-driven startup podcasts from Marks & Clerk. If today's conversation got you thinking about your own IP strategy, we can help. Download our free ebook, The IP-Driven Startup, for practical guidance on building patent portfolios that attract investment and maximize exit value. Then speak to our expert team, because the most successful startups don't leave IP protection to chance. They build it into their strategy from day one.